Hey y'all, and welcome back to Flick Connection, where in less time than you typically spend scrolling for something to watch every night, we're going to talk about 20 totally twisted movies included with your Prime Video subscription.
Sorry, my finger got stuck.
That's right, all these are included with Prime Video right now, which means no ads. They will not be available forever, so make sure you've clicked that subscribe button. That way you get these notifications as soon as these movies are available. Thanks to Trainwell for sponsoring this video. We'll talk more about them in a bit, but my number 20 pick was just recently added to Prime. It's titled The Passenger. You follow this small-town, downtrodden fast food worker when one day something really dramatic happens at work. One of his co-workers shoots up the place and then takes him on sort of a road trip. They actually just go around town. But the main draw for this movie is the villain. Kyle Gallner plays this guy and just nails it. It's an amazing performance. It's nuanced. He's not even the main character, and I think he just carries this movie and is the reason it's as interesting as it is. Believe it or not, Eva Longoria makes this list with a little weird movie she did with Billy Bob Thornton, of all people. It's titled The BAYTOWN OUTLAWS. This is a pretty colorful crime caper. In fact, I would say this is the least twisted out of everything on this list, but it's still got its warped elements, and it's mainly just the characters. You've got these bizarre redneck characters and all sorts of like colorful groups of people. And honestly, this movie just sort of gets weirder as it progresses, but it actually manages to work. I find a lot of times movies like this just end up being just a terrible mess. But because The BAYTOWN OUTLAWS does not forget to have a good time with this redneck caper, it makes the list, even though it's towards the back. Again, this is a pretty solid flick, just not revolutionary in any way, shape, or form.
You ain't gonna believe this. You got the wrong house.
We'll move on to a just incredibly dark revenge movie that is gonna be a great fit for Peaky Blinders fans. Piggy actually stars Paul Anderson from Peaky Blinders. His best friend is killed in a bar fight, and he and that friend's younger brother end up becoming these vigilantes that they call Piggy. They wear these little pig noses, and they start going after the people responsible, and it does have pretty typical revenge movie beats, except they start to enjoy what they're doing more and more as things progress, and the movie itself is actually pretty dark. I will say there are multiple movies titled Piggy. This one's from 2012, again, stars Paul Anderson from Peaky Blinders, and has a odd look to it. It's kind of almost like low resolution. It's almost a grainy, kind of fuzzy type movie. So you do have to be into this idea and this genre to, I think, enjoy Piggy, because there are other movies that do very similar things better. Now, this list in particular is full of weird picks. I mean, these are all twisted movies, and some of them are just beyond strange, and some of them are horror movies as well. My next pick is both. Daniel Isn't Real. Now, this actually stars the son of Arnold Schwarzenegger, Patrick Schwarzenegger, as an imaginary friend, or a demon. You're gonna have to figure out what it is in the movie, but you follow this main character played by a college-age guy who begins to have these visions of his imaginary friend from when he was a kid. The imaginary friend's name is Daniel. The imaginary friend is now grown up just like he is, and this imaginary friend gets up to some wild antics. And I'm telling you, some of the stuff in this movie is quite disturbing, but I found it all interesting, and Patrick Schwarzenegger's performance is amazing in this movie. I've seen him in some other things since, and I think he's quite good, but I was genuinely blown away by how good he was in this flick in particular. Now, this is not one that's for everybody, but if you do like dark, twisted horror flicks, Daniel Isn't Real is a gem from 5 years ago that is still, I think, underwatched. Next up, we got another dark, twisted one that's light on the horror elements, but 13 Sins was actually transformed into a PG-13 teenage romp titled Nerve. That movie starred Emma Roberts and Dave Franco, and it makes good use of the concept, but 13 Sins just goes to a much darker place. The main character here, another guy down on his luck when he's given kind of a golden opportunity. He receives a phone call, he's offered money to kill a fly. And then he's asked to do something else for even more money, and then something else for more money. And the catch is that if he refuses the next thing, then he loses all of the money he's accrued. So it's basically like a dark, twisted game show that this guy is playing out all by himself based off these phone calls that he's getting. And as you can imagine, as the money ramps up, the danger and the depravity ramps up as well. So the concept there is interesting enough for me, but then 13 Sins actually delivers a lot of decent twists and turns for a low budget effort like this. There's a reason they turned it into a more accessible PG-13 flick. All right, dog lovers, you're gonna have a real hard time with my next pick, and I'll even say if you've ever visited the website Does the Dog Die to find out if the dog in the movie dies, my next pick is about a dead dog. It's titled Red. Now this just features an amazing performance from Brian Cox. He is the lead here. He's an old man with an old dog, and when some teenage boys do something awful to this dog, he goes for revenge, but this doesn't feel like a typical revenge movie. The way he goes about it isn't like this tough guy that's just gonna mess everybody's business up. No, he tries to do it amicably, but then you've actually got a pretty decent role from Tom Sizemore in this as well. And the refusal to apologize and make nice just makes things get worse and worse. And so Red ends up being a very different kind of revenge movie, but a very realistic feeling revenge movie. This one obviously gets pretty dark and twisted, but it's also pretty upsetting. It's difficult to recommend this one, but it's still a solid flick again with that just incredible performance from Brian Cox. But if that's too serious for you, I've got another dark, twisted, horror-ish movie that is just a lot of fun. It's titled We Summon the Darkness.
Be careful now. There's a lot of evil out there.
You don't think we can fend for ourselves?
This stars Alexandra Daddario. She goes to a metal concert with a couple of friends where they meet up with some nice-seeming guys, bring them back to their place, and then weird stuff starts happening. She's fantastic in the movie. She does not forget to have fun with this kind of crazy cult-style horror movie. Johnny Knoxville has a small but interesting role here. He's not in the movie nearly enough to ruin it, but his presence in the movie actually makes it sort of stand out and kind of makes the comedy work for this thing. But you also get a bloody slasher-style horror flick out of this. It's just got a bizarre concept that's kind of delightful for horror movie fans, meaning there's not really anything stomach-turning happening in this movie, but you still get just bonkers elements like one of the girls trying to defend herself with a boat prop. Anyone who typically has fun watching horror movies will find a lot to love with We Summon the Darkness. It's a picture of me when I was 25. Here's one of me when I was 32, basically to show you that I used to have the physique of a potato with toothpicks for arms and legs. Here's what I look like now. And I owe it all to today's sponsor, Trainwell, formerly known as Copilot. Now, I'll be 40 this November, and I decided I wanted to be in the best shape possible by the time I hit age 40. That way, it's easier to maintain, and I've been on a journey of building muscle over the past 4 years, but earlier this year, I felt like I had hit a wall. I just was not progressing even though I was putting in the work, and I considered hiring an expensive personal trainer when I got introduced to Trainwell. After signing up and answering a few simple questions, Trainwell paired me up with my own personal trainer. His name is Austin. We kicked things off with a nice, long, face-to-face phone call, and I explained to him what I wanted, what kind of results I wanted to see and why. He then tailored a program specifically for me to do at home with the equipment I have, which is so important. So I've gotten into this shape without ever setting foot in a gym, and I don't have a lot of equipment at home, and I'm seeing massive results, and that has been the most valuable part of Trainwell. There are other things I like, but seeing results fairly quickly keeps me motivated to keep working out week after week. And that means Trainwell works for people at any fitness level. If you're starting at square one, you're gonna get paired with a trainer that'll help you with that. If you're wanting to build muscle like me, you'll get an appropriate trainer. But Austin's routines are fast-paced, plus he's introducing me to a bunch of exercises I never would have done, like the Spider-Man. I love this one. It gets my abs all burning, but it's fun to do. and I never have to worry about what I'm gonna do. It's all planned for me. I just open up the app, I can immediately see what equipment I'm using that day, and as I'm doing the routine, I can see the movements right there on the screen as I'm doing them, which is particularly helpful when Austin adds a new exercise to the day. So if you want to try it out, for a limited time, my viewers can get 2 weeks free, which, trust me, that is enough time to get addicted to something like this. But use the link in the description, you're gonna get 2 weeks free, and the first 100 people to sign up are actually gonna get $25 off their first month in addition to those 2 weeks free. It's a fantastic way to finally start getting in good shape, and it's a great deal. But speaking of great stuff, let's talk about the remaining movies on this list. My next one is one of those picks, I've already had a couple and there's more to come on this list, but it's one of those picks that is definitely not for everybody. In fact, my next selection is potentially the most dark and twisted movie on this list. It's titled Possum. Now this features an amazing role from Sean Harris, like easily one of the most effectively creepy actors working today. And this is an art house movie. It's got a lot of symbolism in it. It's not gonna make perfect sense to everyone who watches it. It's not gonna make perfect sense to most people who watch it, honestly. But it will give you a lot to think about, yet it's not necessarily things you're going to want to think about. Like I said, this is a dark, disturbing movie, but it conveys a lot of those disturbing elements with these fairly clever and artistic devices. I mean, the surface plot here is that he plays a guy who is a puppeteer, and he's got this terrifying puppet in a duffel bag that kind of keeps coming back to haunt him. Visually, the movie is a stunner, but it is also one that's just gonna leave you scratching your head. It does deal with themes of child abuse, so again, you're talking about some deep, dark stuff, but if you do like dark art house movies, Possum is kind of an amazing one. But we're gonna jump from that real artsy, almost classy, disturbing movie to a couple that are just absolutely bonkers, twisted B-level stuff on purpose, starting with The Evil Within. Now this is a truly bizarre horror flick with an even more bizarre backstory. Apparently it was written and directed by a self-made millionaire who was also a meth addict and basically smoked himself to death while creating this movie. And the production was riddled with problems, not just because of his meth addiction, but key figures in the production died or were hospitalized during the process, and it literally took years to get this thing finished. Furthermore, he was not an experienced filmmaker, so there are a lot of flaws with The Evil Within, but there's also a lot of bizarre uses of practical effects that you just don't see in other movies, and they are absolutely fantastic in this flick. That is where this excels. You get this almost over-the-top use of practical effects in The Evil Within, especially for something done at this budget level, and you get them alongside some decent performances that are also alongside some really bizarre, almost awful performances. It gets a little bit disjointed as you get towards the climax, and then it ends up being this really bizarre thing that was actually finished by other people because, again, the director died. Like I said, wild, weird stuff, not for everybody, but if you generally do enjoy wild, weird stuff, The Evil Within is a dynamite recommendation. Just trust me, don't check this movie out if you don't like extremely bizarre stuff. My next one's wild and weird, but it's a little bit more accessible. It stars Daniel Radcliffe as a possessed demon as well in Horns. Radcliffe plays a young man who, after his girlfriend mysteriously dies, he wakes up and begins sprouting horns right out of his forehead. And what makes Horns such an interesting flick is that nobody else around him really seems to mind, and so the reason the horns are growing out of his head actually becomes the mystery that this movie is trying to solve. Now, it is technically like a fantasy movie, and the story, the core one here, is actually quite good and pretty interesting, but the experience of watching it, you're watching Harry Potter run around and try to figure out why he's got this massive horns growing out of his head, and it's great stuff. He is fantastic. I mean, he is a top-notch comedy actor. It's also based on a story from the son of Stephen King, Joe Hill. So if you're into any of that, Horns is a surprisingly delightful fantasy horror flick.
Admit you killed her. It'd be such a huge scoop for me.
I got an idea. How about you guys beat the heck out of each other, and the winner gets an exclusive interview with me?
But my next selection on this list is going to change things up quite a bit with the now cult classic Hell Ride.
Sorry, my finger got stuck.
Written and directed by Larry Bishop and produced by Quentin Tarantino, Hell Ride is a classic B-level movie about a war between two rival biker gangs. Hell Ride is filled with Quentin Tarantino-level violence, it's got this fun, grungy look to it, plenty of sex in the movie. You've also got Dennis Hopper, Michael Madsen, and Vinnie Jones in this flick. There's an acid trip in the desert set to Maggot Brain. I mean, there's so much to love if you like that type of stuff. This came out around the same time as the Rodriguez-Tarantino collaboration Grindhouse, which I also love, and Hell Ride just fits in with those movies almost perfectly. Now legendary horror director Mike Flanagan has done a bunch of great stuff, including The Haunting of Hill House. He's done a handful of big budget movies at this point, like Dr. Sleep, but his first flick I still highly recommend. It's titled Absentia. Now this is a very low budget horror movie that is surprisingly effective, and it is loosely, I say loosely, based on the children's story Billy Goat's Gruff. There's actually a tunnel where people begin to go missing, and the movie's fairly slow paced. You've got to be patient. You do have to kind of be into these lower budget horror movies, but if you are and you like finding little gems like this, especially if you've enjoyed anything Mike Flanagan has done over the years, seeing his first film is a real treat, not just because it's his first, but because, like I said, it's very effective. This one's creepy, it will get under your skin, but if you're too busy looking at how low budget it is, then it may not be for you. Next up, we've got one of the more classic movies on this list. In fact, I've only got a handful of real, true cult classics. And at the top of that heap, I would put Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer. This is easily Michael Rooker's most legendary performance. He plays a serial killer named Henry, and what's so bizarre about this movie is that you follow him. He is the protagonist. Yes, he's killing people, but very much like Matt Dillon in The House That Jack Built, he is the guy that you're almost rooting for. Not quite, but I will say Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer goes to some incredibly dark places in the sense that the camera is there for it. You know what I mean? Like, it does not shy away from some of the visuals. This one is stomach turning. It is the darkest thing on this list. Maybe not the darkest movie ever made, but if you're gonna put together a list of the darkest movies ever made, then Henry is definitely on it. My next pick is actually a Prime Video original movie that just got criminally underlooked, despite the fact that it features an incredible performance from Joaquin Phoenix, and it came out not long before Joker, You Were Never Really Here. In this movie, he plays a man who professionally brings kids out of sex trafficking. So right off the bat, the setup is about as disturbing as you could possibly get, but you do follow him on one of these missions. It feels very raw, very realistic, and it's incredibly brutal. In a satisfying kind of way, if you get my drift. The cinematography is top-notch, and you've got a bizarre but interesting score from Johnny Greenwood, who also did There Will Be Blood. He's part of Radiohead. And the movie itself is not very dialogue heavy at all. It's actually a fairly quiet movie, but it's patient and it's simmering the entire time. If you are a fan of Joaquin Phoenix, or even just a fan of Joker and some of his bigger movies, I'm telling you, this is a dynamite flick. It may not be as well-rounded as you'd like it to be. It's fairly simple and streamlined, so even though it's got some satisfying elements to it, overall, it's not this fulfilling journey, but again, if you love movies like I do, you like Joaquin Phoenix, you like the cinematography, and you like really tense thrillers, this is hitting on all three of those cylinders. Now, Prime Video recently added the movie Challengers, which was from the same director who did the Suspiria remake and Call Me By Your Name, but I want to call attention to his lesser-known movie, Bones and All.
So where'd you move here from anyway? Eastern Shore. Try that.
Now, it's one of his lesser-known movies, despite the fact that it stars Timothée Chalamet as a cannibal. If you've ever seen Terrence Malick's Badlands, then Bones and All is a very similar type of movie. You follow these two young people who are in love, who are kind of on a road trip, but they're technically living off the grid because they are both bloodthirsty cannibals. Very much in the sense of like vampires, but this is not a vampire movie. They're not vampiric. They're literally eating people whenever they need sustenance, and it's kind of wild to watch. Now, the movie itself has multiple scenes in it that are gory and pretty disturbing, but most of the movie is spent with these two characters as they're sort of slowly falling in love and going on this road trip. The cinematography here is beautiful. The story is actually pretty touching and heartbreaking, but it's pretty slow paced. I mean, this is for people who like artsier movies, again, like Terrence Malick's Badlands. This has just got that supernatural touch that makes it actually a fairly appropriate movie leading up to Halloween, but you would not call this one a horror flick. But I feel like it's time for another really fun one on this list. My next pick is one that's kind of done in the vein of Shaun of the Dead. It's somehow wilder and more over the top. It's titled DEATHGASM.
Jesus! It's piss.
Now, if the Shaun of the Dead comparison and the title DEATHGASM have you intrigued, then I can tell you, you will probably love this movie. This comes from New Zealand and features that quintessential New Zealand sense of humor. You follow a group of boys in a metal band trying to defend themselves amid like a demon outbreak. Yeah, they act like zombies. It's basically a zombie movie, but the setup here is that they're demons that were brought to life from like some sort of rock song. There's plenty of blood, saw blades, dildo fights. You know, the stuff you typically find in a movie like this. This is a just absolute riot of a movie. It's as fun as you could want it to be, loaded with practical effects. It goes way over the top, more so than Shaun of the Dead, but hopefully I've turned some people onto this flick who have never heard of it. But my next pick is a Stanley Kubrick-inspired sci-fi movie titled Beyond the Black Rainbow. This is from director Panos Cosmatos, who would go on to direct Mandy with Nicolas Cage, and he has even stated that these two movies kind of go hand in hand. They've got very different vibes, but he actually described this as the inhale and Mandy as his exhale. And as such, they kind of have polar opposite themes and feels to them. I'll say Beyond the Black Rainbow is visually stunning. It's one of the most visually stunning movies on this list and very much harkens back to the days of Stanley Kubrick. But the narrative gets completely lost. It is not glued together well at all. However, I've ranked it incredibly high here because of how valuable all the other elements are in this movie. Panos Cosmatos is really telling us the story, not just visually, but he's telling it to us with these very intense feelings that he's creating with the visuals and the music and everything. So this is another one that's very weird. It will not connect with everyone, but if you think you can connect with something that's this Kubrick-inspired visual feast of a mind-bender sci-fi flick, Beyond the Black Rainbow is a real treat. You just cannot go into a movie like this expecting to get what you typically get from Hollywood. This is not that type of thing whatsoever. But my next pick is, not only is this kind of a Hollywood thing, it's a Hollywood thing from the mid-90s that again is just packed with practical effects. Sam Raimi's Darkman. Now this is based on a comic book. Sam Raimi did this after the Evil Dead movies, but before he began the original Spider-Man movies. And what's so cool about Darkman is it finds its place between both of those. Those are really what Sam Raimi is most famous for, the Evil Dead and Spider-Man. And then Darkman is both things at the same time. It's a superhero movie filled with tons of horror-style practical effects. You've got weird, creepy villains, over-the-top stunts. Frances McDormand is kind of the main squeeze in this movie. Liam Neeson is the main character. This one has a lot in common with things like Reanimator, so if you like that style of horror flick, I cannot recommend Darkman enough, and I don't see it available to stream on services very often. It was just recently added to Prime, and will probably stay there for a while, but again, do not forget to click the subscribe button if you want to get these movie recommendations while they're still fresh and available on the various services. Before my number one pick, it's a good time to mention that down in the top pinned comment, I've got a full list of all the movies for your reference, along with other streaming services currently hosting these. They're available on other things other than Prime Video here in the US, but also around the world. All of those details are down in that top pinned comment. But my number one pick is not only from director Michael Mann, who's most famous for Heat, but it's also the first serial killer movie to feature Hannibal Lecter, and in my opinion, it's one of the most disturbing serial killer movies ever made. It's titled Manhunter. Now, Brian Cox from Red and Succession, he actually plays Hannibal Lecter in this movie, and this came out well before Silence of the Lambs. Now, he's not in it much. Don't get all excited about seeing Hannibal Lecter in the movie. Now, in the early 2000s, they actually remade this and titled it Red Dragon. Anthony Hopkins returned as Hannibal Lecter, and that sort of helped round out the series so that he did all the Hannibal Lecter movies. But this is an insanely creepy movie from the 1980s, and it just oozes that 1980s Michael Mann vibe with the score and the cinematography. There's nothing else that quite looks like a 1980s Michael Mann movie, which is why this is my number one pick. Hopefully you found some good stuff to watch. Don't forget to go check out the Train Well link in the video description if you want to start getting into shape. But I'll keep making these videos as long as y'all keep watching them. Thanks for checking out this Prime Video episode, and you will see me on the next one.